Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mickey Grebitz, Communication Coordinator for Summit School District, and I'm honored to moderate this evening's town hall. Also, if everyone will remain muted during the meeting to avoid background noise, that would be great. So just to frame this meeting, this town hall will be 90 minutes and will focus on meeting our new superintendent, Dr. Marianne Smith Jr. We will also learn about the Restart Guide and our Return to Learn planning. And then we will also be answering your questions from previous feedback opportunities and questions that come up this evening. Any questions we aren't able to get to today will be answered in a frequently asked questions document, which we will share out to families and also post on the district website. Our panelists today include our superintendent, Dr. Marianne Smith Jr., Amy Wineland, Director of Public Health, Drew Adkins, Chief Operations Officer, Cara Drake, Chief Financial Officer, Mary Kay Durray, Chief Academic Officer, and as well as our level leaders, Robin Sutherland, Upper Blue Principal, Greg Guevara, our Middle School Principal, and Tim Ritter, our Summit High School Principal. So we know everyone in our learning community is excited to meet your new superintendent. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Smith.
And so in the words of Brene Brown, she says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so today it's our intention to be extremely clear and to communicate to all of you just the collaborative work that we've been working on over the last few months, even prior to my arrival as your new superintendent, and what has actually landed us here today. So for those of you that are logged on and you're able to see our slide deck, if we take a look there, I want to begin by offering for your consideration an initial quote. And the quote is, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." Once again, those who tell the stories rule the world. This is a Native American proverb that speaks to the power of storytelling. And part of my professional practice has always been to anchor my work in the context or geographical space that I'm in. And so some of us may be familiar that I want to recognize and acknowledge that here in Summit County, we are on the land of the Ute Mountain Tribe. And so that's one of 3 federally recognized tribes of the Ute Nation. And with that, I return back to that initial quote. Those who tell the stories rule the world. And so my question to all of you as our community members is, what story are we ready to tell? And what story are we ready to co-create together for school year 2021? And so I'm going to begin. Next slide, please. As Mickey pointed out, we're going to really set the stage. And I felt it was critically important for you to get a deeper understanding of starting with, who is your new superintendent? Who is the person that has been charged with leading and supporting us during a time of major uncertainty and what many have called unprecedented times? I'll then spend some time walking us through where we've been as a district, where we are currently, and where we're going. And then I'll end my time with all of you by focusing on sharing 10 specific guiding principles that we've used to anchor a lot of our replanning conversations, discussions, and the work over the past 3 months. And so that you understand or deepen your understanding around what that has looked like and sounded like for us. But I would like to be very clear in the words of Brene Brown. Once again, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Reopening is just a starting point for us as a community. And with this new school year, we understand that it must reflect the necessary changes that the pandemic has revealed for us. And that's been an expanded focus on safety, whether that's physical safety, mental safety, psychological safety, emotional safety of all of our scholars and staff. And you'll hear me use the word scholar versus student. I like to say that a student is someone who simply is studying at a school, and a scholar is someone who has the aptitude for study and is a specialist. And so I consider our over 3,600 scholars true scholars, that they are really engaging in the act of learning, unlearning, and relearning. Next slide, please. And so we all have a beginning. And so I come to you from a different type of resort community. Next slide. I was born, raised, and began my education career in my hometown of Las Vegas, Nevada. So I like to say that yes, there are people who actually live in Las Vegas outside of the one street known as the Las Vegas Strip. Next slide, please. The story that I have to tell is anchored in those that I would consider to be my first teachers. And my two first teachers were my mom and dad. And so my mom, Mary Lee Smith, was born in Louisiana, and her formal schooling actually ended in 8th grade. And as an adult, she worked for 30 years as a resort, hotel, and casino maid or housekeeper, and then she retired. My dad, who I'm named after, did graduate from high school and then went on to serve in the military, in the Army. And as an adult, he worked for over 35 years in the resort, hotel, and casino industry as a chef before he retired. And so why am I telling you this information? We know that our lived experiences, our background shapes who we are, and it conditions us to navigate the world. And so my family, or my mom and dad, grew up in the Jim Crow South. And so they have many stories to tell about education, about the lack of access, about inequities. And my parents were my first teachers. And although they weren't able to speak to, I would say, the nuances of navigating what is very complex in the K through 12 education sector, I learned a lot just simply by watching them, listening to them, and observing them in my working class neighborhood in Las Vegas. And so I'm an only child, and just watching the adults around me try to navigate this space. And so I come to you as three things, I like to say. I come to you as a learner. I believe that all perspectives are valid and all perspectives are partial. And so as we work together as a community, you'll see that I am focused on engaging all of us in this work. What perspectives am I missing? What perspectives have we not considered? And how can we increase our outreach to ensure that everyone has a seat at the table to inform our thinking and decision-making processes? I come to you as a scholar practitioner. I have doctoral level studies in critical pedagogy, in equity, in understanding complex systems, and adaptive leadership. And I do believe that that's what we're experiencing right now, moving from crisis management to technical management to adaptive leadership. Next slide. I come to you as a career-long pre-K through 12 post-secondary educator. I've worked at every level of education, pre-K through even post-secondary, as a teacher, as an administrator across 3 different states, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Washington, and now my 4th state of Colorado, in diverse communities, ethnic, linguistic, socioeconomic communities, where I've had the pleasure and privilege of serving and supporting over 45 to up to 450,000 scholars. And so I bring a wealth of understanding and an opportunity to really listen and learn and support all of you as we think about the work ahead. Next slide, please. One of the most critical experiences for me that shaped my view of education is an opportunity that I spent in a summer in Brazil. Some of us may know about the favelas in Brazil, extremely impoverished, and placing myself in a space where it's a new country, it's a new language, and being able to force myself to engage in a new context for me. So I watched and I observed and I asked questions, and I taught myself to actually speak Brazilian Portuguese. And so while we have a dual language program in our school district of English and Spanish, I'm gonna attempt to learn that as best as I can. Eu falo pouco de português do Brasil. So I still speak a little bit of Brazilian Portuguese and look forward to learning and teaching that to some of our other scholars and family members. But what was critically important about this experience was being the other person. And what I mean by that is being someone that was foreign to an environment. And I had to humble myself. I thought I knew a lot about education. I thought I knew a lot about community. I thought I knew a lot about a lot of different topics. But it was a humbling and vulnerable experience to step into a space where I didn't know anyone, they didn't know me, I didn't know the language. And I was truly interested in becoming a part of the community. And so I share that with you because that is the lens that I bring to my work here in Summit County. Is I'm coming from Washington State after living there for a decade. And it's about wanting to be a part of this community. And I'm entering during a time of major change, of major challenge, of major anxiety. But know that I'm committed to being able to work shoulder to shoulder with you to make sure that we move forward and make the best decisions on behalf of our 3,600 scholars. Next slide. And we can advance to the next slide as well. Thank you. And so the commitments that you have for me as your superintendent as we build our relationship is that I'm a champion for equity. I define equity as everyone in our community getting what they need in order to thrive. That's easier said than done. But I do believe that working together during the COVID crisis and during this pandemic, that we're going to be able to envision a clear and compelling vision for the future for our school district together, anchored in equity. You have a superintendent that is all about scholar voice. Earlier this morning, we had a town hall information session with a variety of our scholars, and they spoke directly to us about what worked for them when we transitioned to distance learning in the spring, what didn't work for them when we transitioned to digital learning, and then what were their hopes for this upcoming school year. So I'm always going to have at the center of my decision-making the scholar voice and the scholar perspective. You'll have someone that's focusing on adult professional learning. And so my challenge by choice to all of you as you're listening and watching is, what is it that we may need to learn? What is it that we may need to unlearn? And what is it that we may need to relearn together as we usher in a new vision for our school district? And then that results in our collective impact. I cannot do this work alone. Our district leadership team cannot do this work alone. Our teachers cannot do this work alone. This is a collective effort. And so once again, going back to that key question, what story do we want to co-create together about school year 2021? And then how are we going to be able to do that? It's going to require us to learn, unlearn, or relearn things a little bit differently as we move forward. Next slide, please. And so before I talk a little bit about how we got here, I want to share some information with the larger community. And so since arriving to the county and stepping into this new role on July 1st, I've received a variety of questions, emails, and telephone calls about why as a district haven't you announced your learning plan for school year 2021, while most other districts have formally announced some type of plans. And so I would like to be very clear here. It's important to me and our Board of Education that when we announce our Return to Learn plan, that we provide specific details of the plan so that our families, our staff, our community members can make informed decisions. So questions like, what will high school schedules look like? What about health screenings? What about the requirements for face masks? Those list of questions are long and continue. And the answers are a little bit more clearer than they were a few weeks ago, but not as clear as we would want them to be. And so in our work, we have been committed to three things. Number one, developing a plan that's responsive to the most up-to-date COVID-19 data and public health guidance. And so you'll hear from one of our public health professionals that just yesterday afternoon, actually, we received updated information from the Colorado Department of Education and our local public health partners about guidance for reopening schools. And so we wanted to be mindful of having a plan that's responsive to the most updated information. The second commitment was around avoiding the frustration and the confusion and or the stress that comes with frequent changes to plans. And so as some of you may have seen over the past few weeks and even the past few days, that a number of school districts across the country and even here in Colorado had released their restart plans and then had to recommunicate a new plan days or weeks later after additional information and data was presented. So we wanted to prevent that. And lastly, we are committed to, in our work, to having plans that work through the details of schooling, whether that's in person or that's online, and that these plans are developed with active participation from our community members. And that's why we've engaged in a variety of stakeholder conversations, like our sessions today and yesterday, as well as offering opportunities to provide target feedback in formal surveys and in conversations with you today. And so how did we actually get here? So looking at our roadmap timeline, I want to bring our attention to a few key dates. March 16th, I like to say the Friday before was March 13th. So it was actually Friday the 13th. I think most of us will remember that date when schools closed down. We got this message that here is something that's happening. You have to shut down. We'll give you more information forthcoming. But March 16th, schools were dismissed as part of our public health orders in response to the global outbreak of COVID-19. And per executive order, all schools throughout the state continue to suspend in-person instruction through the remainder of the 1920 school year. Another date, April 20th, our governor suspended instruction for the remainder of the school year, and we entered into what we call the Safer at Home order. In response to that, on May 13th, and this was prior to my arrival, and so publicly I want to say a special shout out and kudos to the district leadership team and everyone that's been involved in the pre-planning to get to this place. But on May 13th, as a district, we convened a restart planning team, and that team consisted of 16 different stakeholder groups across the district that began to develop reopening phases and plans, ideas and thoughts along a variety of different areas. And those areas were public health, academics, operations, communications, health services, special education, and English language development. So really starting that work. Schools have closed, what are we going to do now? So that work began in mid-May. And you'll be hearing from members of some of those different groups today. Another date to spotlight, May 29th through the 31st. The first parent and staff survey went out, as well as our first restart guide that provided some guidance. Feedback regarding the short amount of time for your responses was noted around responding to the survey. So we heard you, and we did incorporate that into the next surveys. And so you may have seen an extended amount of time for you to provide your feedback to additional survey requests. Additional dates that I'd like to spotlight is June 18th through June 29th. Parent questions were sent out, and you received a second version of the Restart Guide that offered additional information around the stakeholder groups that had been working and their initial insights and perspectives up to that date. July 1st, I joined as your new superintendent. And I joined this moving train, getting caught up to speed as to what was going on, and then formulating some key concepts as to how we would continue to move the work forward. A few final dates to spotlight, July 3rd through the 17th. A second parent survey was sent out, and a third version of the school district restart guide was issued, providing additional details around the alternating schedule model, the different learning modalities that I'll speak to, and additional updated information regarding public health and the considerations that we were using to inform our decision making. What I would like to do is invite you to mark your calendars for a few upcoming dates for you to know. And one is this week and two are next week. July 23rd, there's a special board meeting. And at this board meeting, we'll be presenting just a Restart 101 for all of our board members. It'll take into consideration everything that we've shared during our town halls, as well as the additional information that has been provided to us with all of the feedback, the questions, the suggestions, the insights from all of our surveys and information that you're sharing with us. And we'll engage in a workshop type of session where we're dialoguing about what about this, how about this, have you considered, so that we have answered as best as we can with the most current information that we have, all of the Board of Education Directors' questions, so that on July 30th, another date that I would spotlight for you, there'll be a special Board of Education meeting where as a district, we'll be presenting and discussing our official return to learn plan in full. And so that's going to say this is based on all of the feedback, the considerations, the data points, what we're going to use to inform our decision as to how we do believe we're going to return to learn and return to school. And on July 31st, it is our intention to communicate that return to learn plan in its entirety to the entire community. And so be on the lookout for that. Next slide. I shared with you before that we continue to gather a variety of data points, whether that's quantitative data, whether that's qualitative data, or whether that's perceptual data, being able to listen to people's stories, as we did today with a variety of our scholars. And we do this just to get information about where people are and their perspectives and their ideas. As I've shared with you earlier, all perspectives are valid, yet all perspectives are partial. And so we need to make sure that we're hearing all of those voices so that we're getting a holistic picture. And so let's take a look at some of the initial survey results from some of our stakeholder groups. And so with our family survey data in the spring, 66% of our families were comfortable with in-person instruction, and 41% were comfortable with an alternating day schedule. A caveat there, once again, is that the timeline for submitting survey feedback may have resulted in some of the data not being a full representation of our full community, and we are mindful of that. And as you may have seen, and as I stated a bit earlier, the time for submitting future survey results was modified and extended to promote more time and more participation. In July, we saw that 87% of our families expressed comfortability with in-person instruction. Next slide, please. Or if we could just go back one, I wanted to call out something, so apologies for that. And so if I could take a look at our missing information, one of the pieces of missing information was scholar voice. And I shared that a little bit at the top of my conversation with all of you. And I shared that earlier today during a virtual session, we did have an opportunity to hear directly from the population that I do believe has been mostly impacted by school shutting down in person, and that's our scholars. And so we gathered information directly from them around, once again, what worked well in the spring, what did not work well, and what is it that you envision for the school year moving forward. And all of my colleagues that are on this call can actually share, and they would probably nod their heads saying, our scholars were very transparent and very honest about what did work and what did not work. And so we're taking that into consideration. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about the deliberateness and the intentionality of creating a restart plan. And I would like to be clear once again, embodying Brene Brown's words, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so to be clear, the decision to reopen schools and the schedule that we move forward with is not Superintendent Smith's alone. Our return plan continues to be informed by a variety of resources and organizations, some you see on this particular slide deck. And it is based on a review of hundreds of resources and special reports and guidance documents. I shared that the most updated guidance from the Colorado Department of Education and our Department of Public Health just was issued yesterday. And in addition to all of this information, and the competing priorities and the many different ideas and perspectives that are out there, I know that most of us are reading the local newspaper, we're watching the local news, the national news, and it's exciting that K-12 education has been spotlighted and it has been given the attention that it has deserved, because I do believe that educators do the most important work. We are nation builders. And so we are entrusted with children's lives each and every day. And at the same time, we know that there are many different people who believe what we should be doing to best serve our scholars. And so in addition to all of this information that we've been reviewing for the past few months, we know that we're going to make a decision anchored on one key concept. Next slide, please. It's all about who do we serve. And while we are considering hundreds of resources, we're paying attention to the public health guidance. We're following through with organizations that are responsible and leading the charge on COVID-19 school-based strategies. I would like to share with you that our decision as a school district and as a community is that every discussion we have and every decision we make is centered on what is in the best interest to ensure safety, to ensure health, and to ensure the continued learning of each of our 3,500 scholars and the over 500 staff who support them. And so that's at the core of our thinking, our processing, our planning, our thinking about different scenarios. Next slide, please. And so I offer this to all of you, that the journey ahead is going to be extremely messy. We've never done this before. We've never experienced COVID-19 before, and the implications and the impact that it's having on entire communities. And so what I'll be asking of all of you, or at least inviting all of you to think about, is that our work this year will be ever changing. So the concept of being very flexible and being very nimble. Our work is going to be extremely adaptive. So we're in crisis leadership right now. That's a different skill set than technical. Our restart plan will talk about the technical information. And then lastly, we have to get to that adaptive work. How are we thinking differently about everything that we do in our community? And lastly, I ask all of you that I need your help. I am humble and vulnerable enough, as I shared the example of living for a summer in Brazil. I need your help and your support. There will come times where we make decisions where you say, I disagree wholeheartedly with that. But if you're willing to lean into a conversation with me and with our team, we can explain the why. We can talk about the data that was used to inform these decisions. And while we may not always agree on the how of the work, I do believe that if we sit in community and collaborate with one another, that we will eventually understand why we've done this and come to a resolution as to how to support one another. So I'm asking the larger community that I need your full support as we move forward with an unprecedented set of challenges moving forward. Next slide, please. And so some of you may have received the July 3rd email that went out, just responding to the 41% of our families saying that they were more comfortable with an alternating schedule and a blended learning approach. And so as a district, we began to engage in continued planning. But what I would like to say is that as a district, we are planning and will be prepared to implement any of the 3 learning modalities, whether that be all online, whether that's a hybrid model of online and in person, or in person 5 days a week. And the reason for that is that this is done to be responsive to the physical distancing scenarios that continue to be at play. We know that we may experience higher levels of scholars and staff absences. We may experience different cohorts of schools having to go between different learning modalities, and we want to be prepared. And so you'll hear from our teams that have been planning for preparation in all 3 different spaces, because there's a possibility that one school may have to shut down if there's an outbreak. They transition to online learning. Another school is in person, another school is blended. And so the flexibility and nimbleness of this requires some creative, innovative thinking, and our team has already started a lot of that work. Next slide, please. And I'll end my time with you all by speaking specifically to the 10 areas that emerged during a lot of our conversations, through all of our planning, through having what I like to call courageous conversations, putting it out on the table and say, I really don't think that's in the best interest of our scholars. Like, how can, I don't think that's really gonna work for our staff. Nope, I don't think that's really gonna work for, and really being able to walk through all of those different ideas. And as we were doing that, 10 areas emerged as controlling ideas that are anchoring our return to learn planning. And I'll speak to each one of those specifically. So the first one is really around, we're planning for multiple reopening scenarios and different contingencies that really ensure the health, the safety, and the well-being of all of our scholars and staff. And so we thought it was essentially important for us to have those multiple scenarios, because we understand that we must include a return to in-person instruction, the continuation of virtual learning, or a blended approach based on where we are with our local public health recommendations. The second key factor that's leading our work is we're building a COVID-19 response reopening infrastructure. And we're giving careful attention and consideration to safety and sanitation, the implications of social distancing, and the shifting roles and duties of all of our staff, because we want to eventually return to some form of normalcy when we're not in a 5-day in-person instructional model. Our third guiding practice as we continue to engage in this work is to really ensure that our scholars and our families have equitable access to technology that's required for virtual learning. We are fortunate that we are a one-to-one school district, but I'm also mindful that COVID-19 has really focused and created a spotlight on many of the inequities that are evident in our diverse populations. And so not all of our families may have adequate access to internet service. And so having conversations around what could that look like? How can we create hotspots? I'm joining national conversations about making the internet a public utility, very similar to lights and water. And so I'm continuing on with that. Another high priority item for us is that we're really focusing on addressing the immediate and the long-term physical, psychological, social, and emotional needs of our scholars and adults. Because we understand that without question, the pandemic has impacted each of us, yet it's impacted each of us very differently. And so a key focal point for us is really looking at those social emotional strategies and those techniques that must be consistent part of our classroom instruction. So not only are we reinforcing safety, we're focusing on well-being, but we're also focusing on engagement within the learning community. Because as all of us as adults have experienced, communicating via a Zoom virtual for the past few months creates a void of building a learning community or an authentic community. So providing some resources around that. In addition to that, we're focusing on making sure that all of our schools are trauma informed and trauma skilled. And so providing that targeted professional development and that professional learning to ensure that our staff really have a deep understanding around the long-term effects of various forms of trauma, whether that's physical trauma, psychological trauma, mental trauma, relational trauma. And that we're also reviewing a lot of our school district policies and practices and looking at our staff capacities to be able to address the impact of this trauma in all of its different forms so that we're able to create learning spaces where everyone truly feels that they can express their concerns, they can express their anxieties, and they can express their fears. And we have the resources, the tools, the time, and the relationships to move that forward. Next slide, please. We're also preparing for changes that may happen with human resources. You'll hear a little bit about that from some of our additional panelists, that we're preparing for possible contractual issues that may extend into the reopening. And we're thinking about, I may have been hired to be the superintendent, but yet I'm going to be required to step into different bodies of work. And so it's not title specific, it's not role specific. It is what do we need to do right now in this particular moment to ensure that we're providing the resources to our scholars and our families and our staff. And so having those different types of conversations. Yesterday, more than 200 people participated in the staff town hall and heard directly from our Chief Human Resources Officer about these specific ideas and concepts. Another thing that's guiding our work is that we're offering ongoing personalized and differentiated professional learning. We understand that all of our teachers and support staff are coming to us at different entry points. Some people may need targeted foundational support. Others may need targeted supports. Others may need wraparound supports to help them navigate a very complex situation. I like to share when I spoke with a few teachers that teaching in the time of COVID-19 is challenging. And we want to eliminate a lot of those challenges that are within our control by providing the vision, providing the skills, providing the resources, providing the action plan, and providing the support at the level in which you're entering this particular work. And so you'll see that being a part of our plan. We're also going to continue to focus on the COVID-19 related budget and fiscal issues. You'll hear a little bit about that because without question, these are unprecedented times. And as schools reopen, we're aware and we're alert, and we've been alerted to just funding shortages, so shortfalls, and how we may need to reallocate our budget to address the range of health and sanitation supplies. And so we're constantly mindful of the impact on the overall budget. But the last thing I'll share with you, which serves as the overarching umbrella of our re-entry and our return to learn plan and the conversations that we've been having, those courageous conversations, has been that we're embracing a new paradigm for public education. COVID-19 has allowed for us to fundamentally rethink public education. I like to say that in previous times, we may have not made certain choices because we would rationalize it or quote unquote make excuses for it. But we saw that on March 13th, just like that, schools closed down physically. And so we know that we do have the ability to do it. The question that I have collectively, not only for our community, but nationally is, did we have the will to do it before? And so now we have the will, we have the ability, because we've seen it done. We closed schools down in 24 hours and shifted everything that we've done. And now we're going to be able to, as a community, to fundamentally rethink, what does it mean to provide equitable learning and teaching practices, equitable resources for all of our scholars, for all of our teachers, for all of our staff. That's an exciting opportunity for us. And that's what has been at the core of our restart planning. And so I want to thank you all for just allowing me to take the majority of our 30 or 40 minutes or so just to introduce myself, because I do believe that as I'm out in the community, please come up, say hello. I'm here by myself, and so I welcome an opportunity to have my home away from home family. But I am someone who is committed to standing shoulder to shoulder with all of you, to listen, to learn, and to do what's in the best interest, once again, to ensure the safety, the health for all of our scholars and for all of our staff. And I will need all of your support to move that forward. And so I'll turn it back over to Mickey, as we'll have some additional speakers that will speak specifically to some of the areas that I mentioned. And then we'll hear some of your questions, and then we will eventually begin to say, this is how we're going to support each other moving forward. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to establishing our relationship as we move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Smith, for sharing about yourself and then setting the stage for our other panelists. We really appreciate it. Up next, we have Amy Wineland, Director of Public Health here in Summit County. Amy?
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Smith, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to our community. I look forward to a long partnership with you and our public health staff. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about our numbers right now as far as COVID-19 goes. We are doing pretty well, knock on wood, with our numbers. We're not seeing the high rates of increases that we're seeing in some of our neighboring counties and neighboring states that we're being bombarded with in those news outlets a lot lately, in terms of states and other counties who are now actually having to take some steps back. And you know, I'm really proud of what we've been able to enact here in the community with the support of all of our industry partners, strong relationships with our Board of Health, our county commissioners, and everyone is really taking our 5 commitments really seriously to make sure that we're reducing the spread of transmission as much as we can here within Summit County. Research actually shows that those counties who implemented face mask mandates earlier on, for example, have showed lower rates of increase in the virus. So hopefully we'll continue to see that. It's important to also understand that the guidance for school reopening is going to vary across the state depending on what the community spread looks like of the virus. So with that being said, it's important to know too that myself and several members of my staff have been active participants in the work that we're talking about with reopening the schools and return to learn. And it's important to understand that all of us that are working in these teams and on these teams to put the best plan forward are really taking a lot into consideration. And certainly we know in the evidence that school closures have many profound consequences on children and scholars that cannot be overlooked. And these may include regressions in academic gains, heightened depression and anxiety symptoms, greater digital dependence, numerous unmet social needs. We also know that scholars get so much from the school than just education. They learn social and emotional skills, get healthy meals and exercise. There's behavioral health and physical health support within our schools and our amazing school-based health clinics that we have in our system. And school plays an essential role, of course, in addressing inequities, both not only with our scholars, but with their families as well. We also understand that COVID-19 does not seem to be impacting children nearly as severely as other respiratory illnesses, such as influenza, where they actually play a major role in amplifying outbreaks. This does not appear to be the case with COVID. And they tend not to get infected as much. They suffer less extreme symptoms and are also less likely to transmit the virus to others. So it's really important that we're, continuing to learn more about this virus on a daily and weekly basis, and we have to make sure that the plan is flexible enough to take all this new guidance into consideration. It's also really important to understand that we all also recognize that prolonged closures of schools have a really cause a hardship on our working families, especially in knowing that we need to continue to sustain the economy, and we need to make sure that we have a safe place for kids to go while parents are working as much as possible. And so the work we're doing is, of course, to ensure the safety and health of the students first and foremost. Things that we're considering and looking at as we go through this partnership with the school district, are we able to test early and identify symptoms early? We have a really long and strong partnership with the school district where we've worked for years and years to identify outbreaks within the school of all different types of illnesses. And we're able to contain those outbreaks pretty well. And so we have confidence in that strong relationship. Getting children and our scholars to school safely is critical. Safety precautions within the school to limit the movement within the school is really critical to decrease the spread and transmission. The school is and has already put in a lot of operational upgrades within the schools to create more physical distancing. And then, of course, protecting the workforce that interacts with the scholars is really imperative. And so many things that we need to take into consideration. And so it's really a lot of layers of protection that come into play with these plans as far as the public health guidance and recommendation goes. And it's important to know that the interventions work together. They all are layers in protecting and preventing the spread. It's also really important to understand that this is a harm reduction way of thinking. We're not going to be able to prevent 100% of COVID infections in the school, but we can put the best plan forward to decrease the spread as much as possible based on the evidence and research of what will help do that. And those include a lot of the commitments that we've been working on educating our community on since this all began, which are maintaining the physical distancing of 6 feet, washing hands often, covering faces with masks, staying home when when the scholars and staff are sick is critical, and then making sure that we're getting folks tested immediately if they have symptoms, identifying them, isolating them, allowing us to do our contact tracing and investigation in partnership with the school so that we can contain and limit the disruption to learning as much as possible. And despite taking adequate precautions, as we hope we will be able to do, it's important that the school district also have a contingency plan to address spikes in new cases. And what those metrics are, we're still defining what we're going to be measuring, but potential metrics include numbers of outbreaks tied to the scholars, proportion of scholars and school staff that are testing positive, absenteeism tied to respiratory illness and other symptoms that we'll be working on with the school to identify those in the next week or so. So it's really about balancing the risk of infection with the overall child well-being. We're considering taking that harm reduction approach that considers not only the number of cases, but also the mental health, food security, and academic progress of all the scholars. So that's all I have on my talking notes for today, but I am happy to take questions when you have them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. Just for families that may have arrived late to the meeting, if you have any questions, please place those in the chat window and we can pose those to our panelists. Amy, just one question. You had talked about this yesterday about face masks and just their vital part in mitigating the spread. Can you speak to face masks and PPE? Oh, sorry.
Okay. Thanks. Still learning about Zoom always. So yeah, it's really important to understand how valuable face coverings are. If those of you who've been watching media, and certainly if you've been keeping up to date with Governor Polis's press conferences, and the reason why he actually ended up putting a mandate in place for the state is he recognized the strong science behind it. He's seeing the counties that had the mandate having less, lower rates of increase in the virus. And, you know, he actually mentioned one study specifically, and this was in the news a while ago, but it's now recognized as a official study. And it was about some hairstylists that had confirmed COVID-19. And between the two of them, they worked while symptomatic. Among 139 clients that they were exposed to, who all were also wearing face coverings while there. And what's important and key to understand with this is that transmission happens when there's prolonged close contact. So within 6 feet, 10 minutes or longer, within somebody with somebody who is symptomatic or asymptomatic for that matter. So out of all the, among 67 of the clients that actually were tested for COVID-19, none of them actually acquired the illness. They were all negative for their tests and no secondary cases were reported. So it's really important to understand the adherence to our face covering mandate. It will be a key factor in protecting and avoiding this, preventing the spread of illness within our school system. So you will see that in the plan once it is finalized. It's just these tools that we have, they're the best tools that we have, the only tools really that we have for preventing the transmission of this virus. And we need to utilize them with vigilance, both within the school environment and community and outside the school environment. That is what's going to keep our economy open, our school open, certainly. And so it's really vital that we continue to follow the best science out there that we have, and that will be and continue to drive our decisions. Certainly, once we have better treatment for this illness and certainly a vaccine, we will be able to change what this looks like, but that is not certainly the case right now. And the other things that the community public health has been doing along the way as we monitor the cases, monitor science and the data, and what we're seeing in other states is we're trying to be proactive so that we can continue to maintain the new normal that we currently have. And this includes other proactive steps like we did a couple weeks ago by closing restaurants by 11 p.m. And the governor actually came out today and is going to be implementing another mandate across the state where no alcohol sales will be able to happen after 10 in restaurants, bars, as well as liquor stores. So it's important to understand those proactive measures. The other thing that public health is doing and spending a lot of time on right now is coming up with our flu vaccine distribution plans. We are working with a variety of partners across the county to set up strike teams to make sure we're going to be doing a drive-through pod to practice administering vaccine, because that's the way we will be distributing COVID-19 vaccine once we get it. But we really need to increase our flu vaccine uptake as much as possible. When we have COVID overlaying with flu season, that's going to create quite a problem for our community and our healthcare systems. We need to make sure that our healthcare system is not overwhelmed with flu illness. And many of the symptoms are the same. So the more, the higher uptake we have of flu vaccine, the better we will have, be able to continue to keep our community open as well as our school, to make sure that our healthcare system is not overrun. The other piece that's vitally important and that we've seen as an unexpected consequence of COVID-19 is that childhood immunization rates have dropped. And that's likely because people were not wanting to go to the doctor. They were afraid maybe they were going to be exposed to something else. But we have seen a drop in our childhood immunization. So we're really working on a campaign now to also make sure that children are immunized before they get to school, because we don't want to be focusing on other outbreaks such as chickenpox and measles and other things that we know that we can prevent with vaccine. And so that's really critical, and another thing that we're working on in parallel process with this work on return to learn.
Great, thank you, Amy. One other question that came in the chat was, how are Summit County positive counts determined? Is local versus visitors in that count?
There we go.
Sorry.
Awesome. Great question. So as we know, we have been seeing quite the uptick in visitors in our community since we did go to safer at home and started opening up many of the industries that we're seeing. What's important to understand is that our case data and the way that the state defines case is by residents. And so in our case data up on our website, we are only counting those that have tested positive with COVID that are residents to our community, as well as probable cases. So a probable case is a case that has symptoms like COVID and has a known contact to somebody who is positive. We count that also as a positive case. Oftentimes there's somebody who also lives in the same household, but not always. It could be somebody that's been at a gathering or something like that at the same time. And so we identify those in our contact tracing process. So we do not count the visitors if they're positive to our community as Summit County cases, although we do have some understanding of how many of those, at least those that are admitted to our hospital, we know how many come from out of the state. And we have strong partnerships with the state health department, who does follow up on cases of non-residents as long as we know about them. It's important to understand that 40 to 60% are atypical or asymptomatic who have this illness, which is why it's so critical to have those face masks and wear them with commitment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. We really appreciate your time and your partnership with the school district. Next, we will have Drew Adkins come up and speak, and he will be talking about how all these public health orders fit into our school setting. Drew?
Thanks, Mickey. Thanks for having me tonight. Thank you to everybody who's joining us. I really I've appreciated looking down the list and seeing all those familiar faces and certainly names. It's great that you tuned in tonight. Wishing you and yours health during these unprecedented times. And I think that's a good way to talk and introduce operations at the school district level in this ever-changing landscape. And the fact that we have to be, when we're mindful, and our number one priority for all students obviously is learning, but that learning won't happen with some of those basic needs of health and safety. As we saw, certainly it's more challenging in some environments. I'll echo some of what's already been stated. Thank you to Amy Wineland. We work together very frequently and well with the county leadership of what public health looks like, not only for Summit Schools, but for the rest of our county. We had a meeting today to discuss yesterday's Colorado Department of Public Health and CDE joint release of a little bit more description of how we would fall within the different models that have been posed by the state of stay at home, safer at home, and then protect your neighbor. I think that's also a nice, it's a nice, I think overlap, because we have worked really hard at the school district level in our restart guide to overlay and communicate within the stabilization phases of the roadmap to recovery that Summit County Public Health put out last spring. So we continue to do that, communicate in that way, in a way that makes sense and is similar, so that we don't confuse all of our stakeholders with our various models. I think it's also important, again, thanks to Dr. Smith for kicking us off and providing some visioning and background and how we'll be moving forward. But as he said, really looking at what this looks like within 3 different models. Our July 3rd communication was in no way meant to be that this is the model. However, we all have seen that based on public health guidance, which is based on positivity within our community, and we could be asked to go or some other like metric back to schools. And if that were the case, obviously that's extremely complicated. And we talked about what that 50% would look like. And that was the AB model. And that's what we were trying to communicate with that. But there may be, it's really important, I think, to note that the nimbleness and flexibility, and I'll hit those a lot. We talk about being fluid, being nimble, being flexible. I know we're all very cognizant of that, but it's going to be necessary because we may have spaces, we may have buildings in different places based on whether we have symptomatic individuals or positive cases of COVID-19 in that learning community, and or cohorts or pods within that. At an elementary, maybe that's a classroom. At a middle school, maybe that's a team. At the high school, it might be a grade level or a few classes where one symptomatic or COVID positive person shows up and then is in close proximity with, at the high school, 120, maybe down to 30 or 60 at the middle and primary level. And what would that mean? That would mean that we would need to quarantine based on our public health guidance for a couple of weeks. We are all familiar with that with coworkers, family members, and members of our community. So I wanted to talk about that briefly because there's a lot of overlap with public health and schools. Obviously, it goes without saying. But I do want to talk about, we've been looking at a lot of different resources throughout this pandemic, whether that's CDC, CDPHE. Mickey informed me that someone asked in the chat whether we had been looking at the Harvard guidance. As a matter of fact, it's sitting here right on my desk. So thanks for asking that in the chat. With the Harvard School of Public Health, well, a lot of the Metro Public Health, got stacks here that we're looking at in different plans for recovery and ensuring the health and safety of our students, which is paramount, and staff, and anybody in our learning community. So that is absolutely number one. We're trying to operationalize what we will do and take the big picture of the restart into what it'll look like. And that Dr. Smith has charged us with trying to communicate what it will look like. So we've prepared a big picture operationalization, and I'll just hit a few summaries. Again, these are common if you've looked at other big districts like Jeffco, Cherry Creek, Boulder. They all look very similar, and in some of those plans that come from CDPHE or the American Association of Pediatricians, which is another one that CDPHE references. And some of those, when we talk about distance and space, and Amy talked about that a little bit, we have to ensure that. And how do we do that? So we do that. Some of those are in the 5 commitments of the county that that Amy referenced. So I think that's really important, that it's not different in the community than it is in some schools. Certainly it looks different with our operationalization of going to lunch and the bathroom and things like that, but some of the tenets are the same. And when I say that, it's still asking students to wear a mask, asking staff to wear a mask to ensure that we're able to stay open. Amy spoke to the science of the mask and being one, to prevent the aerosols and the droplets. And that's one that absolutely, our governor coming out last Friday, we will be requiring that. The other thing is obviously 6 feet when we can. Elementary students 10 and under, not really transmitting the disease. The science is finding as much as older kids, 11 and older, and adults, might allow for some of that easing of the 6 feet in classrooms. I think that we'll see things in classrooms, if you're wondering, what will this look like? Trying to eliminate the opportunity for COVID-19 or anything else in a pandemic to be on a beanbag or something and removing some of those materials out of those classrooms that can't be easily cleaned. Having students face in the same direction when we can. Disinfecting as much as possible throughout the day, especially when we have different, when I say cohorts, I'm talking about groupings of students, again, like a class or a mixing of those different entities, groups of 30. If they're sharing materials, we're going to try not to do that, but if we do, there's going to be mandatory cleaning. Having kids wash their hands, another one of the commitments, certainly for Summit County and all that we see everywhere, washing their hands and sanitizing every couple of hours. And we're going to see things like, and I'm going to reference this, at lunch in spaces and places, it's going to look very different. We're going to be forced to have those cohorts not mix and have 1,000 kids together at the high school, where we all then quarantine, and it impacts our ability to deliver education in person, but to have those cohorts eat in their own pods or their own group. I think you'll see a lot of that sort of thing, and a lot of those high level, big overarching themes play out in different operational principles, or the to-dos, or how we'll make school work. Signage. So when I talk about buildings and places, I referenced some of those with some specificity. Obviously, I'm just hitting a high-level summary for this conversation, but we'll see signage when you enter our schools now, and you'll see them up, some of them up already. A lot of reminders for kids, and in kid language, of what it looks like to say the ABCs and wash your hands, to make sure you're doing that 20 seconds, and the spacing, and really the distancing that's required. And just like you're seeing in our businesses, the footprints on the ground. It's going to look a little bit different for our families and our visitors. We have those vestibules set up, obviously for safety of our learning communities. But in this COVID pandemic, we are going to try again to really support the sanctity of those cohorts of students. So our parents and our visitors, we won't be allowing those folks into our learning communities, and that's consistent with other plans and the CDC. Large spaces within our buildings will be tough, and we will try not to use those with many kids coming together in those spaces, like a library, or a huge media center, or an auditorium. Assemblies, things like that will not look the same during a pandemic. Again, that's not something that we like or enjoy. Those will just be necessary to ensure that the basic building blocks of education and delivering instruction can be met. And I hope that obviously we'll have the understanding of our learning community and our stakeholders and our families, number one, and why that is. Staggered starts may be a thing that we need to utilize. We know that in our buildings, we can't have, again, if you look at 1,000 kids at a high school coming together, that's certainly larger than the 175 in a large group venue and public health guidance. So we're going to have different entrances and exits. You look at a school like the middle school, and it may have four different exits and drop zones for different. So there's going to be a lot of information yet to come about where and how that will happen, to be able to have kids enter through a door, to be able to get close enough to their classroom to not go through the entire school in case they are asymptomatic and a carrier. That's something that would shut down the whole school. Those staggered starts or different entrances, again, will help us divide them into smaller groups. High touch surfaces, my goodness, in every plan, we have to be cognizant of that with our cleaning plan. We're looking at the CDC's guidance. We have our own cleaning plans that are already in place using disinfectant and then sanitizer. We've also ordered a ton of chemical and material, all EPA approved and safe. One is Oxivir. It is a viricide that is EPA approved that we used in the last outbreak last spring. And can sit for 5 minutes and certainly kill any virus. And we'll be using that if we have an outbreak. And that's one of the questions I know we'll probably get to. Some people ask about, gosh, symptom screening tools. You might have to do a symptom screener before you arrive at work for many of our parents, according to your physical distancing plan by the county. We do that here at the school district, which says, hey, I'm healthy, I don't have any symptoms, I don't have a fever, and I'm good to go. Certainly that will be the case for all of our employees and for our students. The more we can do that at home on the honor system, almost a pledge of health before coming into our learning communities, the better off we'll be because we won't have to have the lines, though we've purchased hundreds of thermometers, to have to do a thermometer check right at the door and hold up learning. So we'll talk about some of that and information to come. Again, this is just a bit of foreshadowing. Again, I mentioned personal protective equipment. A lot of people are having very serious conversations about how to really use, and we're going to be having this conversation in the finance portion of this presentation, but how to use some of the federal dollars in the CARES Act dollars appropriately. And we've used probably $85,000 worth in masks, shields for teachers and or students who are high risk, certainly gloves and equipment, cleaning equipment, etc., hand sanitizer, you name it, automated when you walk in. So we're trying to get prepared for anything and any model. There are a lot of questions in operations. Again, these are high-level summaries. We have detailed bullets for all of these areas about food service. And I foreshadowed and mentioned it's going to look different. We're going to ask kids and have kids eat in their cohorts, which at the elementary might be their classroom. At the higher level, it might be with a grade level or a group of kids. We're going to ask that we not have exchange of money, and we do contactless payments. And I want to give kudos to food service and transportation. We've had some experience with this, but obviously on-the-go lunches, our food service department delivered well over, I think, 40,000 lunches. We were doing something like 3,000 lunches a week during the dismissal and shutdown to our community and even some of our adults. So kudos to those food service professionals. And transportation was doing drop spots as well as serving as Wi-Fi hotspot areas from our buses. We quickly mobilized 5 hotspots onto our buses and then put them in high need areas after surveying. And I'll transition to transportation. Again, many of you might have followed early on during this restart or return to learn conversation. Public health experts were talking about 10 kids on a bus when we normally transport 78. That would have been extremely challenging to have any sort of operational really go on any sort of transportation. Certain school districts, not to be named, in Colorado said we won't transport because it's not efficient. We can't get those kids with 10. That number has increased, and even our own Summit County Public Health now has that 50% for the Summit stage and others, and we'll be operating off of that and trying to get 1 to a seat, which might look like 25 to 30 students on a bus. We'll still be prioritizing those federally mandated supported students who have and need access to transportation, and then asking through more surveys about who is absolutely desperate to have a transportation. We appreciated off our survey to our parents that 90% of our parents said, hey, look, I can get our child to school if needed. Obviously, we prefer the bus, but during a pandemic, we can do that. We'll be relying on all of you to do that. Otherwise, we will absolutely not be able to transport. As it is in transportation, we'll be doing probably multiple rounds if needed. If we have to pick up 50 kids, we'll have to do 2 rounds, 2 laps, which means different start times for different kids. We'll also be talking about route modification. So I ask for your understanding in that we will not go to the extent, or nor will we be able to get kids with that small number on a bus go as far or extensive in some of our routes. And we may be enforcing, we haven't really enforced that half-mile walk distance that's in our board policy, but we'll be asking our families to support us in that. Satellite drop spots, that's absolutely part of district plans all over the country to try to speed up the ability to make 2 rounds more efficiently by picking up at one area or parking lot and having parents come to maybe that far zone and then transporting to school so we don't have to come all the way in. That's a potential, something we're looking at and we're planning. Obviously, when we talk about safety and what it might look like for our kids, we're talking about windows down. Obviously, we're loving those warmer months. We have very few of them in Summit County. Masked up on the bus. And for our older kids, we'll have some of those QR codes that you've probably seen where you scan them with your phone. And if you forgot to do your symptom screener check, you can do that before you enter the school building. That's just a high-level summarization of some of our planning. I appreciate that some of you asked on the chat about the other plans, because that's what we do, is really check our planning against some of the others. As new guidance comes out, we add that. And I just want to add and sum up my part here with, we're in this together. Summit County, we can absolutely do it. I love that about Summit County. We work together. We take on challenges. This will be no different. And I ask for your flexibility and understanding. As Dr. Smith said, we know that none of this will be easy for any of us. So thank you. And Mickey, I'll take any questions on the chat or from the FAQs. I know we had some that were high level that were earlier and that weren't on the chat.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Drew. Really appreciate it. Some questions did come in on the chat of daily screenings. Will temperatures be required? Face coverings for students? And I think all of this is being already operationalized and built into kind of our layers of keeping our staff and students safe. So can you speak to, what are those layers that we're looking at to put in place to keep everyone safe in our schools?
Yeah, I appreciate the chat detail questions about, temperature checks. Absolutely. That's going to be a Summit County public health requirement, and absolutely masking, another one from our governor. Still, adults won't be able to be more than 10, so our teachers won't be able to get together as 10 because they transmit the virus. But certainly our kids, out of most recent guidance, especially 10 and under, can be together. When we talk about Colorado Department of Public Health and that layering approach, Mickey, we have a visual. It's going to be in our restart guide, and it looks like I've got one sitting here actually, but it's like peeling the layers of an onion is really how I like to explain it. And it's again, that same commitment by our community that we all share in the health of our schools. So when our governor says, will you please wear a mask? And we go, I don't want to wear a mask. Well, again, we're jeopardizing the opportunity to spread potentially, and then that it gets to our schools and shuts them down. So I think the first layer is the at home. And those are those 5 commitments that's, that we're going to stay home when we're sick. I'm looking at some of this, put it out by CDPHE, that we have daily health screenings, that we protect vulnerable populations and people with pre-existing conditions, that we quarantine when we're exposed or we isolate when we're positive, that we get tested. We're fortunate in Summit County that we have some of that free testing available, that our school district, when we come to sanitization, that's another layer, sanitization and disinfecting from our custodial teams and all of our staff during the day with those high touch surfaces. That's going to be our teachers, our administrators, that's everybody doing that. And that we all play a part in that. I think school buildings, that's another layer in our practices. So whether that's one-way hallways where we can do it or care for those who become ill, that's been a FAQ as well. And it's part of plans where we have an isolation room. So we're not infecting everybody else when we have a positive in schools, and it's not an if, it's a when. And then we talked about that a lot with cohorts and groupings. And that was the big part of CDPHE's communication yesterday, was get those groups down as small as you can. Obviously at the high school level, that's a tremendous challenge for our high school team. And I think increasing ventilation. So we'll see a lot about that. We're going to be talking about that. That's in everybody's plans. We upgraded filters as a district this past spring while we were on dismissal. So fresh filters ready to go at that MERV level. And we've talked about the recirculation of air, which is in all plans and the ASHRAE plans and everything else. If you're following some of that to ensure that we have recirculation, bigger challenge as it gets colder. And then we talked about restricting visitors. So we'll go into that. And then obviously with our practices for our staff and students and things like that with masks. But it is a layered approach to ensuring the safety. I will say as the caveat that I don't think anybody out there can ensure the safety. We don't have a vaccine yet. That's going to be ensuring the safety. But we're going to do everything in our power to operationalize things to keep things as safe as they can be, to keep our buildings running.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Drew. And just the last question that has come up before in our FAQs and parent questions. What if the school or district is notified of a confirmed COVID case?
Yeah, we talked about that. That was in our FAQs. And I think really every district is required I'm trying to pull it up here, is required to create a plan for that and submit that to the county. So I actually shared that with Amy today and what our 4-page plan looks like. And really, it's no different than what I've talked about. It's preparing for when someone would potentially contract the virus. It's when they have it, and then after, and then the operationalizing of that. And I think obviously our first concern is immediately getting that individual support through the isolation room and to help, and isolating them and taking care of those other individuals who have been in contact with by quarantining and certainly cleaning that room 24 hours after that individual has vacated. We've got a public health, Amy didn't talk about it, but that contact tracing team has been tremendous and had a big job, and certainly they will be helping us as we deal with some of these challenges. So communicating with public health, getting that response team, and then obviously what does that look like even for instruction for that group? So that group then will move nimbly from face-to-face to online instruction, at least for that class for the next couple of weeks. And then advisement, obviously all the protections that come to individuals with when you are sick. So I think I won't go through all of our plans, but yes, we've operationalized that, and I think that's a necessity within any organization during COVID-19.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Drew, for everything. We really appreciate all your work on the operations and the nuts and bolts of what school will look like this fall. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mickey. Team effort.
So up next, we have Cara Drake, our Chief Financial Officer, and she will talk with us about those federal dollars that we've been allocated, CARES Act money, and how we will be using them here in our district.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Excuse me. I did want to talk a little bit about the CARES Act. Those of you who listened in to our budget planning this spring with the Board of Education are probably aware that we are facing reductions in our budget from the state. The economic impacts of COVID-19 have been fairly great across the state, and so legislators worked hard to minimize the impact to education this spring. But really they saw such a shortfall of revenue that they really needed to make some big changes to the state budget. So we did see about a 5% reduction in our state funding, and long-term projections are that it's going to take us a couple of years to really recover, and so we probably will continue facing reductions. So there will be some conversation at the district level around reducing our budget. That is our general fund, our regular operation budget. But alongside that, we also received some additional funds from the federal government, specifically related to COVID response and to support schools in all of these extra needs that we have around the pandemic itself and continuing to offer instruction to students and looking towards returning to school. So the CARES Act money came to us in two different ways. The first allocation is the ESSER funds, which is an acronym for Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funds. Those were allocated directly from the federal government's to school districts, and the allocations were based on our Title I formula. So that looks at census data of student enrollment and specifically at-risk students, and there's a formula that allocates dollars to school districts in that way. So those dollars will be used for supporting a few different things across the district. The first one is a custodial supervisor. So this is a new position that we will be adding for this year. The CARES Act funds are only one-year funds. They're just a grant from the federal government. So at this point, this position will only be 1 year because it is funded with this grant funding. But this position will help support our custodians in both providing some supervision to the night custodians and some training so that we can be sure that we continue doing all the things that we need to do in terms of keeping our buildings clean so that they're safe for our staff and students. Drew mentioned in his comments, I think we spent about $85,000 so far on cleaning supplies and personal protective equipment, PPE. Those supplies are, some of them we have in stock already, some we have on order. So we're doing our best to make sure that we have everything that we need to start school as safely as possible. The next one is tutoring to support students. So this may be some first quarter tutoring. It might be some programs run just prior to the start of school to help those kids that might need a little extra support in getting caught up from remote learning this last spring. And the last one is an additional staff for contact tracing. So in the event that we do have a positive case, we want to have the staff on hand that we can, do all the things that will be required as part of our plan around contact tracing of those individuals. The second pot of money that we received from the CARES Act is the coronavirus relief funds. So these funds were actually allocated from the federal government to states, to local governors, and those local governors were allowed the flexibility to decide how to use those funds. So here in Colorado, our governor, Governor Polis, decided to allocate a large portion of those funds directly to schools, and he did that in May. And the funds will need to be spent by December. So fairly short window on those dollars. So some of the things that we have already determined that we'll be spending those funds are a community liaison. So this will be, again, an additional position that will help support students and families and promote parent engagement and help with our communication with parents around all of these new complications that we have around remote learning and restart of school. So that position is one that we will be hiring as soon as possible. The next one is an online learning TOSA. So TOSA, the acronym, is Teacher on Special Assignment. And so this would be a coaching position that would support all schools and all teachers in just teaching in the remote environment and helping them develop those skills that they need to have in order to be able to instruct students online or in remote learning situations. We've got several additional supports and programs that we're putting in place for students. So some of it is software purchases that we're buying to be able to better offer online learning. Some of it is, as I mentioned, those programs for students with additional tutoring and some additional support for students. And then the last bullet on here is professional development for teachers prior to the start of school. So our curriculum and instruction department is working hard on determining what support teachers need, either with programming or using technology, all of those types of things, and working on planning some professional development for teachers to help them out as we look to restarting school. So as I mentioned before, these funds are one-year funds. We will, we are happy to have them to support our current new situation and all of these additional needs that we have as a result of the pandemic. However, the sort of the other side of our funding and our regular fund, we are looking at reductions. So that will be another conversation that we'll have as we move into this next year.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Cara, for that overview about how we're going to be using those CARES dollars. So no questions came in the chat for anything finance related, but I know one thing we had talked about before was partnering in the community for childcare options if we're in a blended or online learning environment. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. I meant to address that and I forgot. That is one conversation that we've started having. So we have met with some community partners, and that is a need that we are definitely aware of out there in the community, not only for our teachers and their children, but as a community-wide support that's needed for parents and families as well. And so we are working with our community partners and looking at ways that we can leverage support, because that's one thing that Summit County is very good at, is coming together and solving some of these tough problems. And so we are embarking on that work. We don't have a plan yet, so I don't have details to share around that, but I want to assure everybody that that is something we are working on.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Cara. Really appreciate about making that note in there. I think a lot of our families have questions about that, so thank you.
Sure.
And so up next we have Mary Kay Durray. She is our Chief Academic Officer, and she will be introducing our level leaders.
Thanks, Mickey. Thanks to everyone who's on the meeting. We're going to ask you to hang in just a little bit longer. I know we're getting close to our end time. We are the last of the presentations, so hold with us for just a little bit longer. As Mickey said, I'm Mary Kay from Teaching and Learning. As Dr. Smith shared earlier, we in May started to do some different subgroup planning and looking at all the things we needed to look at for those different models, whether we were online, whether we were doing a blended learning model, or whether we were in person. So we had 16 different groups. 3 of the groups that we're going to highlight a little bit tonight were our elementary, our middle school, and our high school group. These 3 leaders, Robin Sutherland, the principal from Upper Blue, Greg Guevara, the principal from Summit Middle School, and Tim Ritter, the principal from Summit High School, have worked with teams of teachers, parents, students, and other administrators to really go and do a deep dive in all of those 3 different models to make sure that we have thought through all the different pieces that we need to address for instruction. So I'm going to let Robin take it over and talk a little bit about her process with elementary.
Okay, sorry. I had to wait a second to get permission to unmute. But I'm Robin Sutherland. I am the principal at Upper Blue Elementary. I just want to start with, I am the level leader for elementary, but it was a team effort. All the principals from all our elementary schools with feedback from our building leadership teams, staff, from families and the parent surveys, and taking everything into consideration. Really develop plans for all phases for all the different models that Dr. Smith had shown earlier. The big thing that we want to communicate in our planning is that no matter what elementary school your student goes to, there's going to be a consistent plan for all phases, whether it's online, it's hybrid, or in person. And that consistent plan will be implemented at all elementary schools. We're working together as a team to ensure that students are safe, as well as that they're learning and growing, and that as well as staff being safe as well. So we miss all of the scholars and students and families and everybody, and really hope that whatever we get to do, that we're back together soon. We're looking forward to seeing everyone. We definitely missed them in some ways this spring and learned a lot, and are moving forward from everything that we learned to put together a great plan. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Greg. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Guevara, principal of Summit Middle School. Sorry, my son just bonked his head, and so I was attending to doing a little first aid on the side. But when we went into dismissal back in March, we obviously were learning on the fly. And at Summit Middle School, we assembled a group of 14 teachers called a hybrid work group. We called it a hybrid work group to begin looking at what education could look like at the middle school if we continued in either an online only model or a blended model. And it was a really great process, several meetings where we just backed up and said, what all could we do under this scenario? What's working during Q4? What's not working? How can we apply that to a continued COVID landscape? And so we met many times, and we then kind of tabled that work as the situation just continued to evolve throughout the summer. So we're looking forward to getting back to work, knowing that things are now adjusted and kind of we're getting close to the start date and figuring out what it's going to look like at Summit Middle School. So you'll see us going quickly into action once we kind of get a little bit more of the picture. Once that becomes clear, we'll be applying everything that we've learned and gleaned to continue working on that and be ready for an awesome opening, whatever that might look like in August. So Summit Middle School teachers have been incredible in coming together and rallying to be flexible and be nimble, and also be super professional in how they're trying to provide the best possible education for students. So I'm going to kick it over to Tim and what they're doing over at the high school.
Hello, everybody. Tim Ritter, principal at Summit High School. What a great opportunity it is to be able to address all of you. And what a great opportunity it is to be able to redefine school and really look into what we're going to do with school and making sure we do what's best for all of our students and all of our staff and our community in order to ensure that we're producing the best of the best as far as all of our kids are concerned, that they get what they need out of school, and as a result of their interactions, that they end up being better people and better scholars coming out of it, and then also that we become a better school because of them. And so we are taking all of the safety measures, and yes, we have been through a lot ever since March 13th, but we have an opportunity to improve our practice as a school and really let our students engage and help us to improve overall as a school ourselves and our community, et cetera. So we also had work groups. We had a staff member work group, which include classified and support staff. And their conclusions they came up with the recommendations of a couple of models, enough models to be able to kind of handle whatever the scenarios were, and we felt pretty good about them coming out of it. And then they kind of had some general recommendations of instructional models coming out of it as far as how high school would look, what's the most effective instruction. And they really used a lot of the feedback from our second group, which was our student, parent, and community work group. We had 4 students on there. We had 4 parents and then a couple of community members. Well, one of which who was a parent. So everyone from county commissioner to our CMC rep to everybody else that was, including the kids, that gave us feedback on their perspective within their groups. And then they also kind of set priorities based on their experience about their online experience. But also, as we kind of explained how a hybrid experience might look, they also helped us troubleshoot a lot of things as far as the hybrid stuff. And then also, stresses and concerns and excitements as far as the in-person instruction. So we had 2 groups, work groups that finished at the end of June. We're now going to, we're going to start up next Wednesday with our work group for our staff members. And then we also have a meeting on August 7th for our student, parent, and community work group. Really kind of, we're in the refinement phase of our process, which actually is going to be a lot more. There's going to be a lot of stuff that we're going to be working through over the next couple of weeks. But talk about 2 of the smartest groups of people I've ever worked with these, with the parent, student, and community work group and their ideas and thoughts that were absolutely wonderful. And then the work group as far as staff members, man, that they're both hardworking and brilliant group of people. So that was awesome working with them. One thing that is a little bit outside, but it was a student concern. I should have talked about it a little bit last night, but I didn't, which I know is a parent concern, which has to do with sports and activities for our school district. First and foremost, CHAS has a plan that they've pushed forth to the governor, and just like every other organization within the district, public health and our governor have kind of final say within our processes, or at least clarifications within how we're doing things. And they will, so they put it for, CHAS has put forth their plan around athletics for the 2020-21 school year, and are waiting on kind of the responses, and then they're going to do some editing and hopefully have something finalized pretty soon, because golf is supposed to set up pretty quickly here. One thing that I wanted to mention also within this is that CHASA has designated 3 groups of sports. So you're going to hear the words lower risk, moderate risk, higher risk, and they're kind of working their plans within those 3 groups. So the lower risk sports are boys and girls golf, boys and girls tennis, boys and girls swimming, sideline cheer, and unified bowling and skiing. Moderate risk is cross country, boys and girls soccer, boys and girls lacrosse, softball, baseball, volleyball, track and field, gymnastics, and field hockey. And higher risk is football, boys and girls basketball, ice hockey, wrestling, and competitive cheer and dance. So just wanted to make sure I got that information out. But we're excited. We're excited about seeing our students, about getting our wonderful staff back into Summit High School, and ultimately having a result that every person is able to come out of Summit High School at the end of the year and say, you know what, I got better because of my association with Summit High School and Summit High School students. So we're excited to have our people back. I'm excited to get started again. And in spite of all the confusion and weirdness of what we're going through, we're really excited to get started on the 2020-2021 school year. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Those are just three of our great principals. We have called on them. Hey, can you guys make a meeting tomorrow? They've talked to us in cars on vacation. So to continue that planning and thinking, we welcome back all of our principals on Monday with open arms. They don't know how excited central office will be to have them back. We've had a small but mighty team working this summer. So just a couple things, Nikki, that I want to share with folks. I know we're over our time and we're getting close, but a couple things top of mind that I know people are thinking about. Online or in-person learning, like Drew talked about, we know how to do that. We'll have to do it a little bit differently with physical distancing and PPE, but what we know people are thinking about is what does that online learning look like? So in the data that Dr. Smith showed earlier tonight, we know that we have about 12% of our families, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, who really are seeking a solely online learning option for next year. That's whether their kids are medically fragile or someone in their family has pre-existing conditions. So we are working on putting that together. We have started to work on that already. We did an application to CDE in June. They have relaxed their requirements. It used to be that in your online program was restricted to just 100 students. So they've relaxed that so we can have any number of students who want to be online next year. So we've got a team at central office, Lana McLaughlin, Liz Stremke, Ellen Clark, some of our instructional team who are helping us work through those pieces. We've also, that same team has helped us with identifying, vetting, and researching some professional development and some software purchases to make sure that we're supporting our teachers, we're engaging our learners, we're helping with kids' achievement if we have to be online. And like Drew and Dr. Smith talked about, going between those three phases at any given time due to outbreaks, we may be part online, part in person. And so we know we really have to be able to do that. And we know we need to help our teachers have the right tools and know how to use them. We've partnered with a company called MobileMind, which is one of 12 nationally recognized Google PD partners. And so we'll be offering that increased skill building for all of our staff in the areas of Google and Google platforms. So we know that that's important. So we're working on all those things, and we've got lots of things in line and ready to go when our principals are back to make some decisions and be able to talk about really some specifics of what we think online learning could look like, with really some consistent, being able to really have consistent usage for staff and for parents to understand. Cara talked about that community liaison position. We've already planned to do some videos in both Spanish and English to make sure that parents can log in, kids can log in, all those different pieces to be able to help. So, and also Cara mentioned that online learning TOSA. So if anybody is interested or knows somebody who wants to do online or is a great community liaison, those positions are posted on the district website. So go there and apply. We'll take all the applicants. So we're working on all those pieces. Lastly, Mickey, I know the one piece that's been top of mind for a lot of families and even kids today, we heard from our scholars in our town hall today, they want to be back in school. They want to be back with their friends. So we know that mental and social emotional health, Ellen Clark and Elizabeth Edgar have been meeting with the team. They're already working on what the plans are for the fall to make sure that we support that community and that relationship building. We're going to continue to partner with Building Hope and provide scholarships for staff and students and parents who need mental health support. And then lastly, our counselors and our school psychologists will really be digging in and making sure that we're supporting our kids, whether we're online, in a blended learning model, or in person, to make sure that we're just helping kids. All of us have been touched by this pandemic. Nobody's going to get out of this without having some kind of impact. So we know it's really important to help our kids just come back together and be ready to learn. So that's just a little bit of update of all the many, many things that we've got going on in teaching and learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Kay. One of the questions that came in the chat was, will there be greater consistency among schools, among classes, among teachers this year? I think that was a point of frustration for some of our scholars last year.
Yep, and I think for all of us, it was tough. That's something that we started to talk to principals about in June, that we really need to make sure when we were clear on our model, I mean, even for all of our models, and when we're clear on some of those platforms and the support programs, making sure we have those clear and consistent expectations for our staff and also for kids. So everyone knows what they can expect. If we're in blended learning and it's on a certain day that you're doing online learning, what does that look like and what can I expect for my student, for myself as a student, and for the teacher? So that is another piece that we are making sure that is one of my top things when the principals come back next week to start working on.
Wonderful. And then just along that line of consistency, a consistent student learning platform for our scholars. I know jumping around between the different platforms was also difficult.
Right. Yep. So we're working on that too, of making sure that we have that really clear and consistent. We actually met with Peter Hansen this week, who is helping us support that instructional technology and to be able to support that, so we have clear, so that teachers know here's what you use, here's what you can use, here's the support for the different academic areas, and to be able to share that out with parents too. One other thing, Mickey, that I forgot is just for people to know, also out of the CARES dollars, we are allocating money to each building to be able to do some jumpstart and some Q1 tutoring, because we know we want to get kids back in the groove and we want to try to minimize any of the gaps in learning that we've had from being online last year. So our building principals are working with their building leadership teams to really think about how can we do some extra supportive students to make sure that we get them back where we are, and our instructional team is going to work with staff to try to do Q1 business a little bit differently, take kids where they are, prioritize some of those standards, and make sure we're addressing our students' needs and pushing them forward and making sure that we don't have any of those gaps to the degree that we can control.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Kay. We really appreciate all your work with it. Just thank you again to all of our panelists for joining us today. I want to apologize that we're 12 minutes over, so just to be respectful of everyone's time, this will be the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is our initial opportunity to engage all of you, but we want to continue to seek your input and insight in our planning process. So 2 dates that Dr. Smith had mentioned coming up are the 2 board meetings. The one this week on July 23rd at 5 p.m. where the board will be digging into all the information presented tonight. And then next Thursday, July 30th, where the district will be presenting the Return to Learn plan to the board. So keep those both on your calendars. If your question was not answered this evening, we will be creating a frequently asked questions document that we will share directly with parents and post on the website. So stay tuned for that. And then we will also share out a Google form so you can continue to send us your questions and feedback and insight into our planning process. But again, thank you for all of you parents and community members out there for sticking with us, and apologizing for being over time, but we appreciate all of you being here this evening. Thank you.